shocking judicial ruling at the close of last week in Utah, one of the hearts of conservative religion in America. U.S. District Judge Robert Shelby ruling that the law banning same-sex marriage in Utah was unconstitutional. We've got footage of the tragic aftermath. Okay, so the tragedy didn't rise to that levels, but some people were inconvenienced, and I'm talking about the gay couples who immediately rushed out to get married. In fact, on Saturday, more than 200 people stood in line, some for as long as 2 hours. But anyway, Robert Shelby, very impressive and unexpected ruling overturning that law banning same-sex marriage. And the way that he did it was incredibly clever. He covered pretty much all of his bases. The first thing that I love is that he kind of trolled Antonin Scalia in his ruling. Now, if you might recall, Scalia said this after DOMA was struck down. Scalia felt that his fellow justices had characterized DOMA supporters as unhinged members of a wild-eyed lynch mob and enemies of the human race whose actions are motivated by bare desire to harm couples in same-sex marriages. And he said specifically how easy it is, indeed how inevitable, to reach the same conclusion with regard to state laws denying same-sex couples marital status. And Robert Shelby said, you have a very good point there, Antonin Scalia. And he did exactly that, at least in Utah. Now, as in many of these cases, when a judge has to consider the argument of the state, in this case an extremely conservative state that just hates homosexuals in every form and certainly doesn't want them getting married, they trotted out the standard stereotypical arguments against same-sex marriage, and Robert Shelby did a great job of knocking down every one of them. So we're going to look at a couple of them specifically because you're going to hear these in the future in other states, and if you have a conservative friend who brings up this bullshit, I want you to be prepared with ammunition to attack them back. So the first claim, and this is perhaps the most common one, why would gay people be able to get married? They can't even procreate. And that's exactly the argument that was levied before Shelby. Philip S. Lott was representing Utah, and this is the exchange that happened. Well, a gay or lesbian person obviously can reproduce, but it's not going to occur within a same-sex marriage. Well, unfortunately, Lott, you're entirely wrong there. Yes, it is going to occur inside of a same-sex marriage. It just won't be in the way that you feel most comfortable with. But there's no reason that a woman in a lesbian relationship, say, couldn't be artificially inseminated. There's no reason that two men couldn't adopt and raise children in that way. And now you might say, well, that's not the natural way that it's supposed to happen, and yet you seem fine when straight couples use artificial insemination, perhaps with sperm donors, or when they choose to adopt people that they're not genetically related to. If you're okay with it in those situations, I don't understand, and you didn't make the case for why it's different in the case of a same-sex marriage. And so Robert Shelby ruled that, of course, that's not actually a good reason to ban it. Of course, there's people who genetically can't give birth or have surgery that stops them from giving birth. And he made the great case that, would you think it was okay if before you can get a marriage license, they had to do some sort of fertilization test? And Lott said, no, of course you couldn't do that. And that's a great response, because obviously the procreation thing is a total red herring. It has nothing to do with their argument for why they don't want same-sex marriage. And so thank you, Robert Shelby, for noticing that. The state also attempted to make the case that same-sex marriage is a new right. It's something new, something different, and for that reason it should not be protected under the 14th Amendment. And I love what Shelby says in response to that. While it was assumed until recently that a person could only share an intimate emotional bond and develop a family with a person of the opposite sex, the realization that this assumption is false does not change the underlying right. I absolutely love that response. Apparently, you can no longer use your ignorance or your willful backwardness to deny rights to significant portions of the population. And so thank you, Robert Shelby, for pointing that out. Of course, the state also trotted out the played-out argument that gays will not make good parents. And I love Robert Shelby's position on this. He says that currently you're just stopping them from getting married. You're not stopping them from getting artificially inseminated, and you're not stopping them from adopting as single gay individuals. And so you're not actually stopping them from being parents. This has nothing to do with that. You're only stopping them from getting married. And so even though it's easy to show that that's wrong, that in many cases gay couples can be not just as good, but in some studies even better parents than straight couples, you're not actually addressing that with a law that's proved unconstitutional anyway. Now, there were a number of other ways that the state tried to defend this law. We're not going to cover all of them, but there is one more that I want to talk about, and that's that this was the will of the people. The people have voted, and so obviously it's constitutional. Well, obviously it's not, okay? When you talk about states' rights and you talk about individual rights, especially civil rights, the civil rights are more important. Now, we are a majoritarian country, but we do care about the rights of the minority. And simply because a lot of people in Utah feel like gays are second-class citizens and should remain that way is not reason enough to limit their rights. Okay? If 55% of the country ruled that Jews should have all their property taken away from them, we wouldn't say that that was constitutional. And in the same way, simply voting to limit the rights of gay couples is not reason enough to continue those limitations. Now look, it's ruled unconstitutional, which does leave them one out. If you want to, feel free. There's a system in place. Simply organize nationally and try to amend the Constitution. You keep talking about it, and Republican politicians keep talking about it, but you haven't actually tried, and I think I know why. You don't want us to actually have that battle rhetorically because you know that the ground is moving underneath your feet. You know that public opinion has been changing, and the majority of America will not go for that. Certainly not a supermajority necessary to amend the Constitution. So you're free to try, but I don't think you'll get the result that you want. But I do like the result of at least this week of judicial rulings on same-sex marriage. We have legal same-sex marriage in New Mexico, and now it looks like the way has been paved in Utah. Robert Shelby, great move. Not a great career move, possibly, because it seems like after this, it's basically impossible that you'll ever end up on the Supreme Court. But you did a service to your country, at least in this case.